The silence stretches between them like a taut wire, broken only by the distant hum of traffic on Interstate 10 and the mechanical wheeze of the gas station's ancient air conditioning unit. Maggie's fingers tighten on the worn rubber grips of her wheelchair as she studies the three young men who've suddenly frozen in place, their predatory confidence evaporating like water on hot concrete. The leader, she estimates him at 19, maybe 20, has the hollow-cheeked look of someone who's lived too hard too fast. His teardrops aren't just decoration, they're a resume written in ink and regret. She's seen his type 1,000 times across courtroom tables, all swagger and barely contained violence, until something bigger walks into the room. And Reaper is definitely bigger. The Hell's Angel hasn't said a word, hasn't even shifted his weight, but his presence transforms the entire dynamic. His hands hang loose at his sides, scarred knuckles visible beneath the late afternoon sun. There's something almost ceremonial about the way he's positioned himself, not just protective but proprietary, like he's claiming territory. Maggie twists slightly in her chair, trying to get a better look at him without seeming obvious about it. The movement sends a familiar spike of pain through her lower back, a reminder of twisted metal and the screech of brakes that came too late. Or maybe exactly on time, depending on who you asked. "You boys lost?" Reaper's voice carries the rough edges of cigarettes and whiskey, but underneath there's something else. Education, maybe, the kind that doesn't come from textbooks. The gang leader's mouth works soundlessly for a moment before he finds his voice. "Nah, man, we're cool. Just talking to the lady here. Looked like more than talking to me." Maggie notices Reaper's slight emphasis on the word talking, the way it drips with skepticism and barely contained threat. She's heard that tone before, from defendants who knew they were caught but couldn't quite bring themselves to confess. The difference is, Reaper's on her side of the equation for once. "Look, we don't want no trouble with the angels," the leader says, taking a careful step back. His companions follow suit, and Maggie can see the relief flooding their faces. Whatever they thought they were getting into, it wasn't this. "Smart boys," Reaper says, and there's almost approval in his voice. "Now, why don't you take that wisdom and apply it somewhere else?" They don't need to be told twice. The three young men scatter like leaves in a dust devil, disappearing around the corner of the gas station with practiced efficiency. Maggie watches them go, part of her mind automatically cataloging details, height, weight, distinguishing marks. Old habits die hard, even when you're no longer the one building the case. The silence returns, heavier now. Reaper hasn't moved from his position behind her chair, and Maggie realizes she's holding her breath. She's spent 3 decades reading people, learning to separate truth from lies, predators from protectors. But this man is a cipher, all contradictions and shadows. "Thank you," she says finally, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "Don't mention it." She expects him to leave then, to disappear back into whatever shadows produced him. Instead, he steps around to face her, and Maggie gets her first clear look at the man who just saved her purse, if not her life. He's younger than his voice suggested, maybe 45, 50 at most. His face is all hard angles and weathered skin, mapped with the kind of lines that come from squinting into too many sunrises on desert highways. But it's his eyes that catch her attention. Dark brown, almost black, and painfully familiar in a way that makes her chest tighten. "You shouldn't be out here alone," he says, and there's something in his tone that sounds almost personal. "Phoenix ain't what it used to be." "Nothing is," Maggie replies automatically, then wonders why she said it. She doesn't usually engage in philosophical discussions with strangers, especially ones wearing outlaw motorcycle club patches. Something flickers across Reaper's face, recognition maybe, or surprise. He tilts his head slightly, studying her with the same intensity she's been directing at him. The moment stretches between them, loaded with questions neither seems ready to ask. A car horn blares from the street, shattering the spell. Reaper blinks and steps back, his expression shuddering closed like a door slamming shut. "You need help getting somewhere?" he asks, all business now. Maggie shakes her head, not trusting her voice. There's something happening here, something that feels bigger than a random good deed in a gas station parking lot. Her prosecutor's instincts are screaming warnings, but they're tangled up with something else, a feeling she can't quite name. "I'll be fine," she manages. Reaper nods once, sharp and final. But as he turns to leave, Maggie catches something in his profile that makes her breath catch. The shape of his nose, the set of his jaw, features she hasn't thought about in 40 years but could never truly forget. "Wait," she calls out, but he's already walking away, disappearing into the heat shimmer like a mirage that might never have been real at all. Maggie sits frozen in her wheelchair for a full minute after Reaper vanishes, staring at the empty space where he stood like she might conjure him back through sheer force of will. The August heat presses down on her shoulders, but the chill running through her bones has nothing to do with the gas station's struggling air conditioning. Those eyes, that jawline, she forces herself to breathe, to think like the prosecutor she spent 30 years being instead of the confused woman she's become. Coincidences happen. Phoenix is full of middle-aged men with dark eyes and stubborn chins. The stress of the encounter, the adrenaline crash, it's making her see things that aren't there. But as she maneuvers her wheelchair toward her modified Honda Civic, Maggie can't shake the feeling that something fundamental just shifted in her carefully ordered world. The drive home takes 23 minutes, same as always. She's timed it obsessively since the accident, measuring her life in small, manageable increments. Traffic light to traffic light, block by block, until she reaches the one-story ranch house in Ahwatukee that Dr. Martinez insisted would be perfect for her new lifestyle. As if being crippled was a choice she'd made, like taking up yoga or learning French. The wheelchair ramp looks exactly as institutional as it did 2 years ago. All smooth concrete and safety railings. Maggie still hates it, still takes a moment before each approach to mourn the 3 wooden steps that used to lead to her front door. Such a small thing to miss, but grief lives in the details. Inside, the house maintains its museum-like quiet. Hardwood floors replaced with practical tile. Counters lowered, doorways widened, a whole life reconstructed around the reality of wheels instead of legs. She's grateful for the modifications, she has to be. But some days the gratitude feels like swallowing glass. The answering machine blinks with 2 messages. The first is Dr. Martinez's office, reminding her about Thursday's appointment. The second makes her pause. "Hi, Mom, just checking in. Call me back when you get this, okay? Love you." David's voice carries the careful concern that's become his default tone since the accident. Her younger son, the family success story, corporate lawyer, beautiful wife, 2 kids she sees maybe 3 times a year. He calls every Tuesday and Friday like clockwork, duty disguised as devotion. Maggie doesn't call him back. Not yet. Instead, she wheels herself to the kitchen and begins the ritual of evening medication. 6 pills arranged by size and color, pain management, inflammation, blood pressure, depression. She's never admitted to Dr. Martinez that she sometimes skips the antidepressants, hoarding them in a small ceramic bowl that sits beside her coffee maker like a porcelain reminder of options. The silence stretches as she prepares dinner, a frozen meal heated in the microwave, eaten at the kitchen island while reading case files she's not supposed to have. Old habit. Her former colleagues at the U.S. Attorney's Office still slip her copies sometimes, asking for her insights on cases they're building. Officially, she's retired. Unofficially, Margaret Chen's mind is too sharp to waste on daytime television and physical therapy. Tonight's file involves a drug trafficking case with connections to several motorcycle clubs operating between Phoenix and Tucson. She reads through the surveillance reports and arrest records, her prosecutor's instincts automatically cataloging patterns and inconsistencies. Hell's Angels Phoenix chapter. Leadership structure. Known associates. Her fingers freeze on the page as she scans a list of club members. There, 3 names from the bottom. Marcus Delgado, also known as Reaper. Age 43. No known address. The file slips from her hands, pages scattering across the tile floor like fallen leaves. Maggie stares down at them, her heart hammering against her ribs with a rhythm that feels dangerously close to recognition. Marcus, 43 years old. The math is simple, brutal in its clarity. Born in 1980, the same year she signed papers in a sterile hospital room, releasing all rights to a baby boy whose father was a law school mistake she'd tried desperately to forget. The same year she chose her career over motherhood and spent the next 4 decades convincing herself it was the right decision. Delgado. Not his birth name, probably. Adopted children often take their new family's surname, create new identities to match their reconstructed lives. But the age fits, the timeline fits, and those eyes, God help her, those eyes that looked exactly like her own father's. Maggie sits surrounded by scattered papers and the weight of impossible possibilities. Outside, Phoenix settles into its evening rhythm of sirens and traffic, the city's pulse continuing regardless of one woman's unraveling certainty about the boundaries of coincidence and fate. She reaches for her phone, David's number on speed dial, then stops. What would she say? That she thinks she met her firstborn son in a gas station parking lot? That he's a criminal who saved her from other criminals? That she's been haunting herself with what-ifs for 40 years and now the universe might be demanding answers? Instead, Maggie sits in her quiet house and wonders if some sins are too heavy for even time to carry. The phone rings at 11:47 p.m., shattering the fragile peace Maggie had finally managed to construct around herself. She's been sitting in her wheelchair beside the scattered case files for nearly 3 hours, staring at Marcus Delgado's name until the letters seemed to blur and dance on the page like living things. The caller ID shows a number she doesn't recognize, local area code, but beyond that, nothing. Maggie hesitates, her hand hovering over the receiver. Late-night calls haven't brought good news since the accident. The last one was Dr. Martinez, calling from the emergency room where David had rushed her after finding her unconscious in this same kitchen, an empty bottle of wine and a full bottle of pills on the counter like evidence of a crime she couldn't quite commit. Hello? Her voice sounds smaller than she intended, swallowed by the darkness pressing against her windows. Silence stretches across the line, broken only by the distant rumble of motorcycle engines and what might be wind or breathing or both. Mrs. Chen. The voice is rough, familiar in a way that makes her chest constrict. Margaret Chen? This is she. The prosecutor in her takes over, professional even as her personal world tilts sideways. Who's calling? It's Marcus, from this afternoon, Reaper. The phone nearly slips from her fingers. She grips it tighter, her knuckles going white against the plastic. How did you get this number? I have my ways. There's a pause, and she hears him exhale slowly. Look, I know this is crazy, but I can't stop thinking about today. About you. There's something I need to ask you. Maggie's mouth goes dry. The case file sits open on her lap, his mugshot staring up at her from a surveillance photo taken outside a Tucson bar 6 months ago. Even in the grainy black and white image, those eyes are unmistakable. I'm listening, she says, though every instinct screams at her to hang up, to pretend this conversation never happened. Your maiden name, before you got married, what was it? The question hits her like a physical blow. She'd never married, never changed her name, but he wouldn't know that. The adoption records would have been sealed. Any connection between Margaret Chen, the unwed law student, and the federal prosecutor who'd built her reputation on being untouchable, carefully buried beneath 40 years of legal bureaucracy. Why would you ask me that? Her voice barely qualifies as a whisper. Because I think... He stops, and she hears the rumble of engines getting closer. Jesus, I don't know how to say this. I think you might be my mother. The words hang in the air between them like a confession that changes everything. Maggie closes her eyes, and for a moment she's 22 again, lying in a hospital bed while a social worker explains the benefits of closed adoption, how clean breaks were better for everyone involved, how she could go back to law school and pretend none of it ever happened. Where are you? She asks. About 3 blocks from your house. Ice floods her veins. How do you know where I live? Same way I got your number. Margaret Chen, retired federal prosecutor, lives alone on Desert Vista Drive. It wasn't hard to figure out. His voice carries an edge now, something dangerous that reminds her exactly what kind of man she's talking to. But that's not why I'm calling. Through her front window, she can see headlights turning onto her street. The rumble of engines grows louder, more distinct. Multiple motorcycles, moving slowly like a parade of predators. I need to know if what I'm thinking is true, Marcus continues. Because if it is, then what happened to you 2 years ago? That wasn't an accident. Maggie's blood turns to ice water. What are you talking about? Your car crash. The one that put you in that chair. I think someone tried to kill you, and I think I know why. The motorcycles are closer now, their engines creating a bass line that vibrates through her chest. She can count at least 4 distinct sounds, maybe more. The Hells Angels Phoenix chapter, riding through her quiet suburban neighborhood like harbingers of a reckoning she's spent 40 years avoiding. The man who died in prison last year, Carlos Vega, the one you put away for running drugs through the reservation. He had a son. Marcus's voice drops lower, more urgent. And that son's been planning something for a long time, something that involves both of us. Maggie grips the phone so hard her fingers ache. Vega. She remembers the case, remembers the man's eyes burning with hatred as the judge read his sentence, life without parole. And she remembers the promise he'd screamed as the bailiffs dragged him away, that his family would make her pay. I'm coming to the door, Marcus says. We need to talk. The line goes dead, leaving Maggie alone with the approaching thunder of engines and a choice that will define the rest of her life. Open the door to the son she abandoned, or remain safe in the lie she's been living. Maggie stares at the silent phone in her lap, her finger hovering over the callback button like it might detonate an explosive. The motorcycle engines grow louder outside, a mechanical heartbeat that seems to sync with her own racing pulse. Through the sheer curtains, she can see the shadows of riders assembling on her quiet street, dark shapes that transform her suburban sanctuary into something from a nightmare. Don't answer the door. The thought screams through her mind with prosecutorial clarity. She spent 30 years learning to recognize dangerous men, and everything about this situation blazes with red flags. A convicted criminal claims to be her son, knows her address, her history, the details of her accident that even the police reports couldn't fully explain. The smart play is obvious. Call 911, let the system she served faithfully handle whatever Marcus Delgado thinks he's doing. But her finger trembles over the phone's keypad, unable to complete the call. Because what if he's telling the truth? The question burrows into her chest like a splinter, sharp and impossible to ignore. 43 years old, those familiar eyes, the way he'd positioned himself behind her wheelchair with an instinctive protectiveness that felt less like stranger's kindness and more like recognition, like muscle memory. The doorbell rings, and Maggie nearly drops the phone. The sound echoes through her modified house, bouncing off lowered counters and wheelchair, accessible spaces that suddenly feel like a prison designed specifically for this moment. She can't run, she can barely hide. Whatever choice she makes, she has to make it from this chair in this room with the weight of decades pressing down on her shoulders. Heavy footsteps cross her front porch. Boots, definitely. The kind that leave marks on hardwood floors and in memory. Maggie wheels herself closer to the front door but doesn't unlock it. The peephole shows a distorted view of Marcus Delgado's face, leather jacket replaced with a simple black t-shirt that makes him look younger, more vulnerable. Less like the dangerous biker who'd emerged from the shadows this afternoon. Mrs. Chen? His voice carries through the door, softer now. I know you're there. I can see your shadow under the door. She closes her eyes, remembering the social worker's questions all those years ago. Are you sure about this decision? Once the papers are signed, once the adoption is finalized, there's no going back. You'll never know what happens to him. That's the point, she'd said. Clean break. Better for everyone. The lie she'd told herself for 4 decades tastes like copper pennies in her mouth now. I have a birthmark, Marcus says through the door, and Maggie's breath catches, shaped like a crescent moon, right shoulder. And I was born with a dislocated hip that required surgery when I was 6 months old. The details hit her, like physical blows. She remembers the nurse pointing out the birthmark. Like he's marked by magic, she'd said with a smile that Maggie couldn't return. The hip dysplasia had shown up on the ultrasound during her pregnancy, one more complication in a situation already drowning in them. Anyone could have gotten that information, she whispers to herself, but the words feel hollow. Medical records from 1980 wouldn't be easy to access, especially sealed adoption files. And why would someone go to such elaborate lengths for a con? She's comfortable but not wealthy, powerful once but retired now. What could Marcus Delgado possibly want from her that would justify this level of deception, unless it isn't deception at all? The thought terrifies her more than any alternative. Because if Marcus is her son, if the baby she gave away grew up to become a criminal, then every choice she made, the adoption, the career, the careful distance she maintained from anything resembling maternal instinct, becomes a catastrophic failure. The prosecutor who built her reputation on protecting society from dangerous men might have created one herself. "You mentioned Carlos Vega," she calls through the door, grasping for professional footing in this personal quicksand. "What does he have to do with my accident?" "Everything." Marcus's voice carries the weight of certainty. His son Miguel has been planning revenge for 3 years, ever since his father got diagnosed with cancer in prison. When Carlos died, Miguel inherited more than just grief. He inherited a promise. Maggie remembers Miguel Vega now, a teenager sitting in the courtroom gallery during his father's trial, dark eyes burning with the same hatred that had consumed Carlos. She'd made a mental note then, filed it away with dozens of other threats that came with the territory. Prosecutors learned to live with the possibility of revenge, but they also learned not to let fear dictate their lives. Maybe that had been a mistake. "The brake lines on your car were cut," Marcus continues. "Professional job, designed to look like mechanical failure. Miguel's been bragging about it for months, how he took down the prosecutor bitch who destroyed his family." The crude words sting, but it's the implication behind them that makes Maggie's blood run cold. If Marcus knows these details, he's either deeply connected to the criminal underworld that wants her dead, or, "Why are you telling me this?" she asks. "Because nobody hurts my mother, not even if she gave me away." The words hang between them like a bridge Maggie knows she can't uncross. Her hand moves to the deadbolt, fingers trembling against the cold metal, and she realizes this is the moment everything changes. Not the accident 2 years ago, not even the day she signed those adoption papers. This moment, right now, when she chooses to open the door to a truth that will reshape everything she thought she knew about her life. The lock clicks open with finality. Marcus fills her doorway like a thundercloud, and up close she can see details the afternoon chaos had hidden. A thin scar bisecting his left eyebrow, calloused hands that speak of manual labor mixed with violence. And yes, those eyes, her father's eyes, looking back at her across 40 years of silence and regret. "Jesus," he breathes, staring down at her with an expression caught between wonder and pain. "You really are her. Come in." The words escape before her prosecutor's mind can object, before the neighbors start asking questions they shouldn't know the answers to. He steps across her threshold, and the space seems to shrink around his presence. The house she's carefully designed for her disability suddenly feels claustrophobic, every lowered counter and widened doorway a reminder of how much her world has contracted. Marcus's boots echo on her tile floors as he moves deeper into her living room, his gaze cataloging details with an intensity that makes her skin crawl. "Nice place," he says, "but there's no judgment in it, just observation. Safe neighborhood, good security system." He nods toward the alarm panel by the door. "Smart, considering the enemies you've made." She gestures toward her couch, needing to establish some semblance of control over this situation. "And tell me about Miguel Vega." But Marcus doesn't sit. Instead, he walks to her front window and peers through the curtains at the street beyond. "4 of my brothers are out there right now, watching for trouble. Miguel's not the kind to try anything with witnesses around, but he's also not the kind to give up. Your accident was supposed to kill you. When it didn't, he'll try again." Maggie's prosecutor instincts fill in the blanks, even as another part of her mind struggles to process that this dangerous man claims to be her child. "How long have you known?" "About me, I mean." 6 months. Marcus finally turns from the window, and she sees something vulnerable flicker across his features. I hired a private investigator to track down my birth parents. Cost me $3 grand I didn't have, but I needed to know. He pulls a folded paper from his jacket pocket, extends it toward her. Birth certificate. Says baby boy Chen. Mother's name, Margaret Ellen Chen, father unknown. Maggie doesn't take the paper. She doesn't need to. The details are burned into her memory from a hospital stay she spent 40 years trying to forget. What were you planning to do with that information? Nothing, at first. Marcus refolders the document, slides it back into his pocket. What was I going to say? Hi, Mom, I'm the kid you threw away, and I grew up to be everything you put people in prison for. Seemed like it might be an awkward conversation. The bitter humor in his voice cuts deep, but Maggie forces herself to meet his gaze. Then why now? Why risk exposing yourself, your club, everything, to save someone who gave you away? Because when I saw those punks circling you today, something in my chest just... He stops, runs a hand through his graying hair. I don't know. Snapped, maybe. Like every foster home, every beating, every night I spent wondering why I wasn't worth keeping. None of that mattered anymore. You were in trouble, and you were mine to protect. The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. Maggie wheels herself closer, studying his face for traces of the baby she held for exactly 17 minutes before the social worker took him away. The infant who'd gripped her finger with surprising strength, whose eyes had opened just once to look directly at her before she forced herself to look away. Foster homes? She asks quietly. 7 of them. His voice goes flat, professional, like he's reciting someone else's history. The adoption fell through when I was 3. Turns out the couple who wanted me got pregnant with their own kid and decided they didn't need a spare anymore. Bounced around the system until I was 18, then found my real family with the club. Each word lands like a physical blow, painting a picture of the life she'd convinced herself she'd spared him from. She'd imagined loving parents, suburban stability, opportunities she couldn't provide as an unwed law student. Instead, he'd gotten abandonment multiplied by people who were supposed to offer sanctuary. Marcus, I don't. He holds up a hand, and she sees the same gesture she makes in courtrooms when objecting to testimony. I didn't come here for apologies or explanations. I came because Miguel Vega is planning to finish what he started, and you're going to need protection whether you want it or not. Maggie looks at her son, and God help her, she knows now that's exactly what he is, and realizes her old life is over. The careful boundaries between prosecutor and criminal, between her public service and private shame, have just dissolved completely. There's no going back to the safety of ignorance, no pretending this conversation never happened. She's crossed into territory where everything she thought she knew about justice, family, and the consequences of choices made in desperation will be tested. What do you want me to do? She asks. Marcus walks to her kitchen counter and spreads out a hand-drawn map that looks like something from a military operation. Red X's mark locations across Phoenix, connected by lines that form a web of surveillance points and escape routes. Maggie wheels closer, her prosecutor's eye immediately recognizing the tactical thinking behind the layout. This isn't the work of a street thug, but someone with genuine strategic intelligence. Miguel's got connections with MS-13, the Aryan Brotherhood, and at least 2 Mexican cartel factions, Marcus explains, his finger tracing the marked locations. Your hit on his father didn't just take down one man. It disrupted a pipeline that was moving product from Sonora to Denver. A lot of people lost money, and they've been waiting for payback. You're telling me there's a bounty on my head? Maggie studies the map with growing unease. The red X's cluster around her neighborhood, her physical therapy clinic, even the grocery store she frequents. Someone has been watching her daily routines for months, learning her patterns like a hunter studying prey. $50,000, dead or alive. Though Miguel's made it clear he prefers dead. Marcus pulls out his phone, scrolls through photos until he finds one that makes Maggie's blood freeze. It's her, taken with a telephoto lens, exiting her car at the gas station this morning, hours before their confrontation. This was uploaded to a private chat room at 6 a.m. today. Miguel's been planning something big, and those three idiots this afternoon weren't part of it. They were freelancers looking for easy money. The realization hits her like ice water. The gang members who cornered her weren't the real threat. They were practice, a test run for something much worse. How do you know all this? Because I've been hunting Miguel for 3 weeks. Marcus's voice carries a lethal edge that reminds Maggie exactly what kind of man she's dealing with. The Angels don't tolerate outside crews operating in our territory without permission. When word started spreading about a hit on a federal prosecutor, my president wanted to know who was stupid enough to bring that kind of heat down on Phoenix. And you volunteered for the job. I volunteered before I knew who the target was. He meets her gaze directly. When I figured out it was you, everything changed. This isn't club business anymore, it's family business. Maggie absorbs this information with the analytical detachment that served her through 3 decades of prosecuting violent crimes, but underneath the professional calm, panic claws at her chest. The life she's rebuilt since the accident, careful, controlled, predictable, is disintegrating in real time. What are my options? You could disappear. I've got contacts who specialize in making people vanish, new identity, relocation, the works. But Miguel's patient and $50,000 buys a lot of patience. You'd be looking over your shoulder forever. Or we end this. Miguel dies, the bounty dies with him, and you get your life back. Marcus pulls out a combat knife, sets it on the counter next to the map with casual familiarity. I can make it happen. 1 phone call, and he's just another statistic in the gang war numbers. The offer hangs between them like a test, and Maggie feels the weight of every conviction she's ever secured pressing down on her shoulders. She spent her career believing in the system, in the principle that justice comes through courts and laws, not vigilante execution in desert alleys. But the system hasn't protected her, has it? The brake lines Miguel cut could have killed an innocent family when her car went out of control. The accident destroyed her mobility, her independence, nearly destroyed her will to live. And now she sits in her wheelchair, dependent on a son she abandoned and bikers she should be arresting, because the legal system she devoted her life to can't stop a street gang from hunting her like an animal. There's a third option, she says slowly, pieces of a plan forming in her prosecutor's mind. We don't run, and we don't murder him. We build a case. Marcus laughs, but there's no humor in the sound. A case? Mom, these aren't white-collar criminals worried about SEC violations. Miguel's killed at least 6 people that I know of. You think he's going to confess because you read him his rights? The word mom hits her like a physical blow, and for a moment she can't breathe. 40 years of careful emotional distance, of convincing herself she'd made the right choice, crumbles under the weight of that single syllable, but she forces herself to focus on the tactical problem because breaking down won't keep either of them alive. Not confess, she clarifies. But criminals always make mistakes when they're angry. Miguel wants me dead badly enough to put a bounty on my head, to bring federal attention to his operations. That's not rational thinking. It's emotional, and emotional criminals are vulnerable criminals. Marcus studies her with new respect, seeing perhaps for the first time the mind that built one of Arizona's most formidable prosecutorial records. You want to use yourself as bait. I want to use myself as justice. Marcus stares at her for a long moment, and Maggie sees something shift behind his eyes. A recognition that maybe the woman who gave him away possessed the same steel that kept him alive on the streets. But when he speaks, his voice carries the patient tone of someone explaining basic survival to a child. Justice is a luxury for people who aren't actively being hunted. He taps the knife against the counter, a rhythmic sound that emphasizes each word. You build cases in courtrooms, with evidence and witnesses and rules. Miguel operates in parking lots and abandoned warehouses where the only rule is don't leave witnesses. Then we change the playing field. Maggie wheels closer to the map, her finger tracing the surveillance points around her neighborhood. You said he's been watching me for months, learning my routines. That means he's invested time, resources, manpower in a specific plan. Criminals hate changing plans. It introduces variables they can't control. And how exactly do you propose to force his hand? The question hangs in the air while Maggie's mind works through possibilities, discarding options that rely on physical capabilities she no longer possesses. She can't run, can't fight, can't disappear into shadows like her son can, but she can think, and thinking has always been her deadliest weapon. You said there's a private chat room where the bounty was posted. Can you access it? Marcus nods slowly. One of my brothers is good with computers, former military intelligence before he found the club. Then we feed them information. False schedules, fake vulnerabilities, carefully constructed opportunities that look too good to pass up. Her voice gains strength as the strategy crystallizes. Miguel wants to finish what he started with my car accident. He wants it personal, dramatic, something that sends a message about what happens to people who cross his family. You're talking about painting an even bigger target on yourself. I'm talking about controlling when and where that target gets activated. Maggie pulls out her phone, scrolls through her calendar. I have a physical therapy appointment Thursday at 2 p.m. Same clinic, same time, every week for 2 years. Predictable, isolated, perfect for an ambush. Marcus's expression darkens with understanding. Except you won't actually be there. Oh, I'll be there. The words surprise even her, but as soon as she speaks them, Maggie knows they're true. But not defenseless, not alone, and not without documentation of everything that happens. Mom, that's... He stops himself, runs both hands through his hair in frustration. Maggie, you're talking about walking into a kill zone and hoping the bad guys make mistakes before they put bullets in your head. The word mom hits differently this time. Less like a shock, and more like recognition of something that's always been true, even when buried under decades of denial. But she can't afford to examine that feeling now, not when tactical planning requires her full attention. I'm talking about turning Miguel's emotional investment against him. He doesn't just want me dead. He wants me to suffer first, to know why I'm dying, to understand that Carlos Vega's son finished what his father started. Maggie wheels back to face Marcus directly. That need for dramatic closure is his weakness. We can exploit it by using my mother as bait in some elaborate trap that could go wrong in 1,000 different ways. The possessive pronoun, my mother, creates a flutter in Maggie's chest that she ruthlessly suppresses. She spent too many years compartmentalizing emotion to let it derail her now, especially when clarity might be the only thing standing between them and Miguel's vengeance. By using the system the way it was designed to work, she gestures toward the map, the surveillance photos, the evidence of months of criminal planning. Everything Miguel's done, every move he's made, it's all prosecutable under federal stalking and conspiracy statutes. We just need to catch him in the act with sufficient documentation. Marcus picks up his knife, tests the edge against his thumb. A thin line of blood appears, bright red against calloused skin. And if your plan fails, if Miguel decides to skip the drama and just puts a sniper on a rooftop, then you do what you came here to do. The words taste like copper in her mouth, but Maggie forces them out anyway. You protect your family the only way you know how. The admission hangs between them like a bridge neither is sure they want to cross. Marcus sets down the knife and looks at her, really looks as if seeing her clearly for the first time since walking through her door. You realize what you're asking? You want me to watch you walk into danger, betting everything on the idea that Miguel Vega will follow a script written by the woman who destroyed his father. I'm asking you to trust that I know how predators think. And I'm promising you that if this goes wrong, I won't blame you for finishing it the way you wanted to from the beginning. Outside, a motorcycle engine rumbles to life, one of Marcus's brothers adjusting position or reporting in. The sound reminds them both that this conversation exists inside a bubble of protection that can't last forever. Decisions have to be made. Lines have to be crossed. Marcus stands and walks to the window again, but this time his posture carries a different tension, not the casual alertness of earlier, but the coiled readiness of a man accepting an inevitable fight. When he turns back, his face has transformed into something Maggie recognizes from her darkest prosecutorial cases, the expression of someone crossing a line they can never uncross. Thursday, 2 p.m., he says quietly. That's tomorrow. The words hit Maggie like a physical blow, and suddenly the abstract planning crystallizes into terrifying reality. 26 hours. She has 26 hours to prepare for a confrontation that will either end Miguel's threat permanently or end her life in the desert heat outside a strip mall clinic where she spent 2 years learning to walk again. We'll need recording equipment, she says, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. Multiple angles, audio backup, everything transmitted to a secure location in real time. If Miguel confesses if he says anything incriminating, we need it documented. And if he doesn't feel like chatting? Marcus moves to her kitchen counter, begins folding the tactical map with precise military-style creases. If he just shows up shooting, then we make sure the right story gets told afterward. Maggie wheels closer to him, drawn by something she can't name, the need to be near her son maybe, or the primitive instinct to huddle together before battle. Promise me something, Marcus. He looks up from the map, and she sees her own eyes staring back at her, the same shade of dark brown, the same intensity when focused. The resemblance she'd been too shocked to notice during their first confrontation now seems undeniable. If this goes wrong tomorrow, if Miguel kills me, you don't become him. She reaches out, covers his scarred hand with her own. I know what revenge feels like, how it eats at you until nothing else matters. I've seen prosecutors become the very monsters they used to hunt because they couldn't let go of personal grievances. Marcus's jaw tightens. He put you in that wheelchair. He's planning to finish the job tomorrow. You want me to just let that slide? I want you to survive it. The words come out sharper than intended, carrying 40 years of suppressed maternal instinct. I want you to have a life that's about more than settling scores for people who are already gone. Like you did? The question cuts deep because it's fair. Maggie has spent 2 decades pursuing longer sentences, harsher penalties, more devastating prosecutions, always in the name of justice. But how much of it was really about control, about proving to herself and the world that she had power over the chaos that had defined her early life? Like I should have, she admits. But it's too late for me to choose differently. It's not too late for you. Marcus pulls his hand free, but gently, without rejection. He studies her face with the same analytical intensity she's seen him apply to tactical problems, as if trying to decode something in her expression. You know what the worst part was? He says suddenly. Not the foster homes, not the beatings, not even growing up thinking my mother threw me away like garbage. It was wondering if maybe I deserved it, if something was wrong with me that made me unworthy of keeping. The words shatter something inside Maggie's chest that she's kept carefully protected for 4 decades. She sees 17-year-old Marcus in a youth detention center, 30-year-old Marcus burying his rage in motorcycle engines and illegal brotherhood, 40-year-old Marcus finally finding the woman who abandoned him and discovering she needs his protection. There was nothing wrong with you, she whispers. There was everything wrong with me. I was 22, broke, scared, convinced that giving you away was the only way to give you a chance at something better. I told myself I was being noble, making a sacrifice for your future. Instead of admitting I was terrified of failing you the way everyone had failed me. The confession tastes like blood, but she forces it out anyway. My father left when I was 5. My mother died when I was 16. I'd never seen functional parenting, never had anyone show me how love was supposed to work. Keeping you would have meant risking everything I thought I understood about survival. Marcus absorbs this revelation in silence, his expression cycling through emotions too complex to name. Finally, he speaks with the careful precision of someone testing dangerous ground. So tomorrow, when Miguel comes for you, you're not just facing him. You're facing 40 years of wondering what would have happened if you'd made different choices. The truth of it hits her like physical impact. Tomorrow isn't just about justice or survival. It's about whether a mother and son who found each other too late can write a different ending to the story that began in a hospital room 4 decades ago. Yes, she says simply. Outside, another motorcycle engine starts up, then fades into the distance, her protectors repositioning themselves as evening approaches. The sound reminds them both that time is running out, that tomorrow will demand answers to questions they've barely begun asking. The phone call comes at 3:17 a.m., tearing Maggie from restless sleep like a gunshot. Marcus's voice cuts through her grogginess with surgical precision. They moved early. Miguel's not waiting for your therapy appointment. He's coming now. 3 vehicles, maybe 8 men, heading toward your neighborhood. Maggie's blood turns to ice water. She wheels frantically to her bedroom window, peers through the blinds at streets that look exactly as they should at this hour. Empty, quiet, innocent. How long do we have? Maybe 10 minutes. Mom, listen to me very carefully. The line goes dead. Panic floods her system as she tries calling back, but Marcus's phone goes straight to voicemail. She tries again. Nothing. The protective network that had surrounded her for days has vanished into the desert night, leaving her exactly where she swore she'd never be again, alone and defenseless. Her hands shake as she wheels to the front door, checks the locks Marcus had reinforced yesterday. They feel pathetically inadequate now, like paper barriers against hurricane winds. Everything about their careful plan has disintegrated. No controlled environment, no recording equipment, no backup. Just Maggie in her wheelchair and whatever violence Miguel brings to her door. She reaches for her landline to call 911, but stops when she sees the phone cord dangling loose from the wall jack, cut clean through. When did that happen? How long has she been trapped here without even knowing it? The sound of approaching engines fills the pre-dawn silence like approaching thunder. Not motorcycles, trucks and cars, moving slowly, deliberately, the mechanical heartbeat of a hunting pack. Maggie wheels to her living room window and watches 3 sets of headlights turn onto her street, cutting through darkness with predatory intent. Her mind races through options that don't exist. The panic room Marcus had suggested installing wasn't finished. The neighbors' houses stand dark and distant, too far to reach, too isolated to matter. Even her cell phone shows no signal, somehow blocked or jammed, another preparation she hadn't anticipated. The vehicles stop 2 houses down, engines idling. Doors slam. Voices carry on the desert air, speaking rapid Spanish she can't quite make out. But the tone is unmistakable, the casual confidence of men who believe they hold all the advantages. This is how it ends, she realizes with crystalline clarity. Not in a courtroom where her words carried weight, not in a controlled confrontation where justice might prevail, but in her living room at 3 a.m., trapped in the wheelchair that Miguel's first attempt had put her in. The poetic symmetry would probably please him. Footsteps on her front porch, the soft scrape of metal against metal, lock picks probably, or maybe they'll just kick the door down. She's prosecuted enough home invasions to know how quickly these things unfold once they begin. Where is Marcus? The question tears through her with maternal agony she has no right to feel. Did Miguel's people find him first? Is her son dying in some alley while she sits here waiting for her own execution? The possibility that bringing them together might have gotten Marcus killed crushes her more completely than any fear for her own life. A sharp crack echoes through the house, the sound of her reinforced front door giving way despite Marcus's modifications. Heavy boots cross her threshold, and she hears Miguel's voice for the first time in person. Find her. Check every room. Maggie wheels backward toward her bedroom, knowing it's futile but unable to simply wait for them. Her hands fumble for the .38 Marcus had given her yesterday, but it's not in the drawer where she left it. Gone. When? How long have they been inside her house, moving through her life like ghosts? Mrs. Chen. Miguel's voice comes from directly behind her, soft and conversational. She turns to find him standing in her bedroom doorway, flanked by 2 men whose faces blend together in the darkness. You've been very difficult to reach. He's younger than she expected, maybe 35, with Carlos Vega's same dark eyes but none of his father's crude brutality. This Miguel carries himself like a businessman, someone who approaches violence as a management problem requiring efficient solutions. Where is my son? The words escape before she can stop them. Miguel tilts his head, genuinely curious. Your son? I wasn't aware you had children, Mrs. Chen, but then there are many things about you I'm still learning. The casual dismissal tells her everything and nothing. Either Marcus is already dead, or Miguel doesn't know about their connection. Either possibility feels like failure so complete she can barely breathe around it. 40 years, Miguel continues, stepping into her bedroom with the relaxed confidence of someone who knows the prey is cornered. 40 years my father rotted in prison because of your prosecution. He died there, Mrs. Chen. Died believing his family had forgotten him. Your father was a murderer. Yes, Miguel agrees simply. But he was me murderer. The admission hangs in the air like smoke, and in that moment, Maggie sees the terrible truth she spent 40 years running from. Not about Miguel or his father or the elaborate revenge that brought them to this bedroom confrontation, but about herself, about the fundamental lie that's shaped every decision she's made since she was 22 years old. I understand, she says quietly, and means it completely. Miguel's eyebrows lift slightly. Do you? You're not here because your father was innocent. You're here because he was yours. The words come from somewhere deeper than strategy or prosecutorial experience, from the raw maternal terror that's been clawing at her since Marcus's phone went dead. Blood doesn't stop mattering just because someone commits crimes. Love doesn't disappear just because the person you love makes terrible choices. Something flickers across Miguel's face. Surprise maybe, or recognition. An interesting perspective from someone who spent 30 years separating families. No. Maggie shakes her head, feeling pieces of her worldview crumbling and reshaping themselves in real time. I spent 30 years telling myself that justice was more important than love, that protecting society mattered more than protecting the bonds between people. I was wrong. The confession tastes like blood in her mouth because it invalidates everything she's built her identity around. Every prosecution, every harsh sentence, every time she'd looked into the faces of defendants' families and felt nothing but professional satisfaction. It had all been elaborate self-deception, a way to avoid confronting the fundamental truth about her own capacity for abandonment. You gave up your son, Miguel says, and it's not a question. Something in her voice must have revealed what his research hadn't uncovered. That's how you know. I gave him up because I was afraid of failing him. Because I thought my love wasn't enough to overcome my circumstances. The words pour out of her like confession, like bleeding. But really, I was just afraid. Afraid of the mess and uncertainty and sacrifice that real love requires. It was easier to tell myself I was being noble than to admit I was being a coward. Miguel studies her with the focused attention of a predator reassessing prey that's behaving unexpectedly. His men shift restlessly behind him, clearly confused by this philosophical turn in what should have been a straightforward execution. My father wasn't a good man, Miguel continues, his voice carrying new complexity. He beat my mother, sold drugs to children, killed people for money and sometimes just for the pleasure of it. But when he held me as a baby, when he taught me to drive, when he told me stories about his own father back in Mexico, in those moments, he was just my dad. And I took him away from you. The enormity of it crashes over her like a physical wave, not just Carlos Vega, but hundreds of fathers and mothers and siblings, torn from their families by her prosecutions. She'd always focused on the victims, on the communities protected by removing dangerous people. She'd never allowed herself to see the other side of that equation. The children left behind, the families destroyed, the love that persisted even when it shouldn't. You did your job, Miguel says, but there's less venom in it now. The system worked exactly as designed. My father committed crimes, got caught, went to prison, died there. Clean and simple and legal. But not just. The realization hits her like revelation, like lightning. Justice isn't just about punishment. It's about making things whole again. And you can't make anything whole by tearing families apart without trying to rebuild what you've broken. Through her bedroom window, she hears the distant rumble of motorcycle engines. Multiple bikes, moving fast, getting closer. Marcus. Her son is alive and coming for her, and the knowledge fills her with relief so profound it's almost religious. But Miguel hears the engines too, and his expression hardens back into business mode. It seems our conversation is about to be interrupted. It doesn't have to be. Maggie wheels closer to him, driven by desperate inspiration. Miguel, What if there was another way to honor your father's memory? What if instead of just adding more violence to the cycle, we could actually break it? You want to bargain for your life. I want to offer you something better than revenge. The motorcycle engines are getting louder, maybe 2 minutes away now. You said your father died believing his family had forgotten him. But you didn't forget. You spent years planning this moment, proving that his life mattered to someone. That's not something you can accomplish by killing me. That's something you've already accomplished just by being here. Miguel's gun wavers slightly, and she sees conflict warring in his features. The same expression she'd glimpsed in Marcus's face when he'd first found her in the desert. The terrible burden of carrying someone else's pain, of trying to love adequately enough for two people. The question now, she continues, is what kind of man your father raised? Someone who can only express love through violence, or someone strong enough to choose a different path? The engines reach her street. The motorcycle engines roar to life outside, and suddenly Miguel's careful orchestration dissolves into chaos. Shouting erupts from the front of the house, his men calling out in rapid Spanish, their voices tight with alarm. Through the bedroom window, Maggie sees headlights cutting through the darkness like searchlights, motorcycles weaving between Miguel's parked vehicles in a deadly ballet of intimidation and positioning. "Stand down!" Marcus's voice booms through a megaphone, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "You're surrounded. Release the woman and we can discuss terms." Miguel's jaw tightens, but his gun hand remains steady, still pointed at Maggie's chest. "Your son, I presume?" When she nods, his mouth twists into something that might be a smile, touching, a family reunion. "Miguel." Maggie keeps her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You said your father died believing he'd been forgotten. Look around you. Look what love does when it refuses to give up. Marcus found me after 40 years. You spent decades planning this moment to honor your father's memory. Neither of us forgot the people we lost. Neither of us stopped caring just because the system said we should." The sound of breaking glass comes from the living room. A window, probably, or maybe Marcus's people, creating multiple entry points. Miguel's men are calling for instructions, their voices carrying the edge of impending violence. But Miguel himself seems frozen, caught between the momentum of his long-planned revenge and the uncomfortable truth of what Maggie is offering him. "You think I can just walk away?" he asks. And for the first time since entering her bedroom, he sounds young, uncertain in a way that reminds her of every defendant she's ever watched grapple with the consequences of choices they couldn't unmake. "After everything I've invested in this moment, I think walking away takes more courage than pulling that trigger," Maggie replies, wheeling slightly closer despite the weapon trained on her. "Killing me won't bring your father back. It won't change the fact that he died in prison. But choosing to break this cycle, that would be something he could be proud of." A thunderous crash echoes through the house as the front door gives way completely. Heavy boots pound across hardwood floors, and she hears Marcus shouting tactical commands to his brothers. Positions, angles, containment protocols. The language of controlled violence, which she recognizes from 30 years of crime scenes and evidence photos. Miguel's breathing quickens, his finger tightening on the trigger as footsteps approach the bedroom. Maggie sees the exact moment when his resolve crystallizes, when the philosophical uncertainty hardens back into lethal purpose. "I'm sorry," he whispers, and she believes him completely, but some debts can only be paid one way. The bedroom door explodes inward just as Miguel's finger completes its squeeze. Maggie throws herself sideways in her wheelchair, muscle memory from 2 years of physical therapy, finally serving a purpose she never imagined. The gunshot is deafening in the enclosed space, the muzzle flash turning everything white and brilliant for an instant. When her vision clears, Marcus is on top of Miguel, the two men rolling across her bedroom floor in a tangle of fists and fury. Miguel's gun skitters away under her dresser, but she can see the knife in his left hand, arcing toward Marcus's ribs with practiced precision. "Marcus!" Her scream cuts through the chaos, and her son twists just enough to catch Miguel's wrist, redirecting the blade into the hardwood floor where it sticks and vibrates like a tuning fork. The fight is brutal but brief. 40 years of rage and abandonment issues, channeled into Marcus's fists, Miguel's careful planning no match for the raw desperation of a son protecting the mother he thought he'd lost. When it ends, Miguel is unconscious and bleeding from a broken nose, Marcus kneeling over him with split knuckles and murder in his eyes. "Don't," Maggie says quietly, and something in her tone makes Marcus pause with his hands wrapped around Miguel's throat. "Don't become what I made myself into. Don't let revenge be the only legacy we pass down." Marcus looks up at her, his face a battlefield of conflicting emotions. "He tried to kill you. Again." "Yes. And he failed. Again." She reaches out, touches his bloodied hand. "We're alive, Marcus, both of us. After 40 years of separation and 2 years of being hunted, we're both still here. That's not revenge. That's grace." The bedroom fills with other angels, their leather and steel presence somehow reassuring rather than threatening. Miguel's men have been contained, zip-tied, neutralized. The immediate danger has passed. But as Maggie looks around at the wreckage of her bedroom, at her unconscious would-be killer and the son she's only just found, she realizes something profound has shifted. For the first time in 4 decades, she's not alone. For the first time in her adult life, she has someone worth protecting more than her own principles. The real work, building something new from the ashes of their fractured family, is just beginning. The road back. The police arrive 20 minutes later, their red and blue strobes painting Maggie's destroyed bedroom in alternating shades of justice and chaos. Detective Ray Sanchez, whom she's known since he was a rookie patrol officer 15 years ago, surveys the scene with the weary expression of someone who's seen too many nights like this one. "Jesus, Maggie," he mutters, stepping carefully around the blood spatter and overturned furniture. "When you said you had information about the Vega case, I thought you meant paperwork, not a war zone." Marcus stands against the far wall, his leather cut zipped up tight, arms crossed in the universal posture of a man who's said all he intends to say to law enforcement. 3 other angels flank him, silent, watchful, their presence both protective and subtly threatening. They've already given their statements, all variations on the same theme, heard gunshots, responded to assist a citizen in distress, arrived to find the perpetrators subdued. Technically accurate, carefully incomplete. "Miguel Vega orchestrated my car accident 2 years ago," Maggie says, watching as paramedics load the unconscious man onto a gurney. "He's been planning this revenge killing ever since his father died in Pelican Bay. His men disabled my security system, cut my phone lines, jammed my cell service. This was premeditated, attempted murder." Sanchez scribbles notes, occasionally glancing between her and the motorcycle club members who clearly don't belong in this suburban crime scene. "And your friends here just happened to show up at the right moment?" "Marcus Chen is my son." The words feel strange in her mouth. 40 years of secrecy dissolving in a simple declarative sentence. "I gave him up for adoption when he was born. He's been watching out for me since Miguel's threats escalated." The detective's pen stops moving. In 30 years of law enforcement in Phoenix, Ray Sanchez has developed finely tuned instincts for when a case is about to become exponentially more complicated. "Your son, the Hell's Angel." "My son," Maggie confirms, and something in her tone warns against pursuing that particular line of questioning. "Who saved my life tonight?" As if summoned by her words, Marcus pushes himself off the wall and approaches her wheelchair. The other angels remain in position, a leather-clad honor guard maintaining careful distance from the police while making their loyalty unmistakably clear. "We need to talk," Marcus says quietly, his voice carrying undertones that make Detective Sanchez suddenly find his paperwork fascinating. "About what comes next?" Maggie nods, understanding completely. "Miguel's arrest won't end this. It will only pause it. There are still loyal soldiers in the Vega organization, still cousins and brothers and friends who view family honor as a debt that transcends generations. Tonight's victory feels hollow when measured against the long campaign still ahead." "Mrs. Chen," Sanchez interrupts, "we'll need you to come to the station tomorrow for a full statement, and we'll want to coordinate with the DA's office about protective custody options." "No," the word comes out sharper than she intended, carrying 40 years of hard-won authority. I'm not hiding anymore, Ray. I spent 2 years in my house like a prisoner, and it didn't keep me safe. I spent 4 decades running from my own family, and it didn't make me happy. I'm done with protective custody. Sanchez exchanges glances with Marcus, two men who understand violence in ways Maggie has only prosecuted from the safety of courtrooms. Maggie, be reasonable. The Vega organization will be dealt with, Marcus interrupts, his voice carrying the quiet certainty of someone stating geological facts. My mother won't be threatened again. The possessive pronoun, my mother, hits Maggie like a physical blow, 40 years of grief and regret crystallizing into something that might eventually become healing. She reaches up, touches Marcus's scarred knuckles with fingers that shake only slightly. Not through more violence, she says firmly. We're not going to solve this by becoming what we're fighting against. Then how? Marcus crouches beside her wheelchair, bringing them to eye level. You think the courts are going to protect you? The same system that let Miguel walk free while he planned your murder for 2 years? It's a fair question, and one Maggie has been wrestling with since Miguel first appeared in her bedroom doorway. The law she's served her entire adult life feels suddenly inadequate, a blunt instrument trying to address wounds that require surgical precision. I don't know yet, she admits, but we're going to figure it out together, and we're going to do it right. As the paramedics wheel Miguel past her on their way to the ambulance, he regains consciousness long enough to meet her eyes. What she sees there isn't hatred anymore, but something more complex, a recognition, perhaps, of the choice she offered him and the choice he made instead. This isn't finished, he whispers through swollen lips. No, Maggie agrees quietly. But it's going to be. The promise tastes like commitment in her mouth, like a vow she has no idea how to keep but absolutely intends to honor. The ambulance pulls away into the Phoenix night, its red taillights disappearing around the corner like dying embers. Detective Sanchez finishes his preliminary report and promises to follow up in the morning, leaving Maggie alone with Marcus and his brothers in the wreckage of what used to be her sanctuary. We need to move you, Marcus says without preamble, already scanning the broken windows and splintered door frame with tactical assessment. Tonight. They know where you live, how to breach your security, how many minutes it takes police to respond. This place is compromised. Maggie's first instinct is to refuse. 40 years of fiercely guarded independence, rebelling against the idea of displacement. But as she surveys her destroyed bedroom, the bloodstains on her carpet, the bullet hole in the wall 6 inches from where her head had been, she realizes independence is a luxury she can no longer afford. Where? She asks. Somewhere they'll never think to look. Marcus wheels her chair toward the hallway, his brothers forming a protective formation around them as they move through the house. Somewhere we can control every variable. The clubhouse. She doesn't need him to say it. She can read the destination in the way his brothers automatically clear paths, check sightlines, communicate through subtle gestures developed over years of brotherhood. They're taking her home. Their home. The irony isn't lost on her. 30 years of putting bikers behind bars, and now she's seeking refuge in the heart of their world. There's something else, Marcus continues, as they reach the front door. Miguel wasn't working alone. The Vega organization has contracts out, serious money for anyone who can finish what he started. Taking him down tonight bought us time, not safety. A different kind of chill runs through her, colder than the desert night air. How many? Does it matter? One of the other angels, she thinks his road name is Diesel, speaks for the first time. Could be 5, could be 50. Point is, every street criminal in Phoenix just became a potential threat. Marcus shoots him a warning look, but Maggie appreciates the brutal honesty. She's spent too many years in courtrooms to tolerate comfortable lies now. So we eliminate the source, she says quietly, her prosecutor's mind automatically shifting into strategic mode. Cut off the head, the contracts die with it. The source is already in custody, Marcus points out. Miguel can't exactly call off the bounty from a jail cell. Miguel isn't the source. The realization crystallizes as she speaks, pieces of a larger puzzle suddenly clicking into focus. He's angry, he's motivated, but he's not strategic enough to orchestrate something this comprehensive. The surveillance, the timing, the coordination with multiple criminal networks, Someone else is backing this operation. Marcus stops pushing her wheelchair, something in her tone demanding his full attention. What are you thinking? Maggie closes her eyes. 30 years of investigative experience filtering through everything she knows about the Vega case. Carlos Vega's associates, his business partners, the shadow networks that had taken her months to unravel during the original prosecution. Most of them had scattered when Carlos went down, but a few had been too deeply entrenched to abandon their Arizona operations entirely. Eduardo Castellanos, she whispers, the name tasting like poison in her mouth. Carlos's business partner. I could never prove his involvement in the drug operation, but I knew he was dirty. If Miguel needed funding, organization, connections, then we pay Mr. Castellanos a visit, Diesel says, cracking his knuckles with anticipatory satisfaction. No. Maggie's voice cuts through the night air like a blade. We do this right. We gather evidence, build a case, use the system to... The system had 40 years to catch this guy, Marcus interrupts, his patience finally fraying. How's that working out? It's the question she's been dreading. The fundamental challenge to everything she's built her identity around. The law has been her religion, due process her scripture, but tonight has exposed the gaps between idealism and reality in ways she can no longer ignore. Then what do you propose? She asks, though she suspects she already knows the answer. Marcus exchanges glances with his brothers, a silent conversation that speaks to years of shared experience operating outside conventional boundaries. When he looks back at her, his expression carries the weight of decisions she's not sure she's ready to make. We give him a choice, he says finally. Same choice you offered Miguel. Walk away clean or deal with consequences the courts can't provide. And if he chooses wrong? The question hangs in the desert air like a challenge, like a test of everything they claim to believe about justice and family, and the prices we're willing to pay for both. Marcus doesn't answer immediately, but when he does, his voice carries the certainty of someone who's already counted the cost. Then we finish this, once and for all. Maggie stares into her son's eyes. Her son, this stranger who shares her blood and her stubborn refusal to accept defeat, and realizes they've arrived at the moment she spent 40 years avoiding. The choice between the law she's served and the family she's found, between the justice she's preached and the love she's finally claimed. There's no going back from whatever comes next. The Castellanos compound sits like a fortress in the Scottsdale Hills, all wrought iron and security cameras, the kind of ostentatious wealth that money laundering builds. Maggie studies it through binoculars from the passenger seat of Marcus's truck, her prosecutor's eye cataloging defensive positions and escape routes with the same methodical precision she once applied to crime scene photographs. Still time to call this off, Marcus says quietly, though they both know that's a lie. They passed the point of no return the moment she chose family over protocol, love over law. Let the system handle it. The system had its chance. The words taste like ash in her mouth. 40 years of faith dissolving in the Arizona sunrise. Eduardo's been untouchable for decades because he's smart enough to insulate himself, rich enough to buy protection. But tonight, he made a mistake. He came after my family. The possessive pronoun feels foreign but right. Family. After 4 decades of solitude, the concept seems both miraculous and terrifying. Marcus checks his watch, 5:47 a.m., early enough that Castellanos will be home, late enough that his security detail will be tired, complacent. The angels have been watching the compound for 3 days, mapping patrol routes, identifying weaknesses. This isn't vengeance, it's tactical precision. Remember the plan, Marcus says into his radio. We're here to talk. Nothing happens unless he forces it. Static crackles back. Acknowledgements from the 6 other bikes positioned around the perimeter. Maggie recognizes some of the voices now. Diesel, Hammer, Phoenix. Men who've become her unlikely protectors, her son's chosen brothers. The family she never knew she needed. The front gate swings open at exactly 6 a.m., just as their surveillance predicted. A black Mercedes emerges. Castellanos heading to his morning gym appointment, a routine he's maintained for 15 years. The same attention to schedule that makes him a successful criminal also makes him predictable. Marcus pulls across the road, blocking the Mercedes 50 yards from the gate. In her mirrors, Maggie watches other motorcycles emerge from concealment, forming a loose circle around the luxury sedan, not aggressive, but unmistakably purposeful. The Mercedes stops. Through its tinted windshield, she can see Eduardo Castellanos, older now, silver-haired and distinguished in the way that money provides. When he recognizes her in the passenger seat, his face goes through a fascinating progression of emotions, surprise, calculation, and finally something that might be respect. He steps out of the car alone, leaving his driver inside. A calculated display of confidence that tells Maggie everything she needs to know about his involvement in Miguel's operation. Innocent men don't face down Hell's Angels with such composure. "Margaret Chen," he says, approaching her open window with the casual manner of someone greeting an old colleague. "I heard you'd had some excitement recently. Terrible thing, home invasions. The world just isn't safe anymore." "Cut the bullshit, Eduardo." She wheels her chair out of the truck, Marcus falling into position behind her. "We know you funded Miguel's operation. The surveillance equipment, the coordination, the bounties on my head, that's your money, your organization." Castellanos glances around at the motorcycles, the leather-clad men watching him with predatory stillness. "Even if that were true, what exactly do you plan to do about it? You're not a federal prosecutor anymore, Margaret. You're just a disabled woman making accusations she can't prove." The words are designed to wound, to remind her of everything she's lost. Instead, they crystallize her resolve. She's not just Margaret Chen anymore. She's Marcus's mother, part of something larger than her individual grief. "I'm giving you the same choice I gave Miguel," she says evenly. "Walk away. Call off the contracts, disband your operation, disappear from Arizona, or face consequences that have nothing to do with courtrooms or due process." "Is that a threat?" Castellanos' voice carries more curiosity than fear, as if he's genuinely interested in how far she's willing to go. "It's a promise." Marcus steps forward, his presence shifting the entire dynamic. From a son who just found his mother, from a man who's spent 20 years learning that some problems can't be solved with paperwork. For the first time, uncertainty flickers across Castellanos' features. He's calculated the risks of federal prosecution, the costs of legal defense, the probabilities of conviction. But Marcus represents variables he doesn't understand: the mathematics of brotherhood, the economics of family loyalty. "You have 24 hours, Maggie continues. "After that, you become a priority for people who don't believe in plea bargains." Castellanos looks between mother and son, perhaps finally understanding the true nature of what he's facing. This isn't law enforcement or criminal enterprise. It's something more primal, more dangerous. The convergence of justice and love, authority and rebellion, everything she's spent 40 years keeping separate. 24 hours, he repeats quietly. "And if I refuse?" Marcus's smile contains no warmth whatsoever. "Then you'll discover what justice looks like when it's not constrained by constitutional protections. The confrontation that will define both their futures hangs in the desert air between them." The silence stretches between them like a taut wire, each second ratcheting the tension higher. Castellanos studies Maggie's face with the calculating gaze of a man who spent decades reading people's weaknesses, their breaking points. What he sees there seems to surprise him. "You're bluffing," he says finally, but there's uncertainty beneath the bravado. "Margaret Chen doesn't make deals with criminals. She puts them away." "Margaret Chen lost everything to men like you," Maggie replies, her voice carrying the weight of 40 years' worth of choices. "Her career, her mobility, her safety. She's got nothing left to lose, which makes her very dangerous." Castellanos' eyes flick to Marcus, then to the circle of motorcycles, calculating odds with the cold precision of a man who's survived in the shadows through careful risk assessment. "Even if I agree to your terms, you think this ends here? The Vega family has honor debts that span generations. Miguel's cousins, his—" "Will receive a very simple message," Marcus interrupts, his scarred hands flexing unconsciously. Anyone who comes after my mother answers to the Sons of Hell MC. All of them. The entire charter. The weight of that promise settles over the desert morning like a storm front. Maggie feels something twist in her chest, pride and terror warring for dominance. This is what protection looks like when it comes from family, when it's backed by the absolute certainty of violence in response to threats. It's everything she spent her career arguing against and everything she's discovered she needs. 24 hours, she repeats, but even as she says it, she can see Castellanos making his choice. His expression shifts, hardening into the mask of a man who's decided that retreat is more dangerous than confrontation. No, he says quietly. I don't think so. The words hang in the air like the moment before lightning strikes. Maggie sees Marcus tense, sees the other angel shifting position in her peripheral vision. This is the moment she's been dreading and expecting in equal measure, the moment when talking stops and consequences begin. Eduardo, don't, she begins, but he's already reaching inside his jacket. Everything happens with brutal efficiency. Marcus moves faster than should be possible for a man his size, tackling Castellanos before the gun clears his holster. They hit the asphalt hard, rolling, fighting for control of the weapon. The Mercedes driver emerges with his own pistol, only to find himself facing 6 motorcycle engines roaring to life. 6 men bearing down on him with the coordinated precision of a wolf pack. The gunshot comes from somewhere in the chaos, a single sharp crack that seems to split the morning in half. For a heartbeat, everything stops. Then Marcus staggers to his feet, blood soaking through his leather jacket, Castellanos' pistol in his hand. Marcus? Maggie's scream tears from her throat as she wheels toward him, 40 years of emotional barriers crumbling in the face of her terror. He's hit, wounded, possibly dying, and all she can think is that she's about to lose him again. This son she's only just found, this family she's only just claimed. I'm okay, he gasps, but the spreading crimson stain on his jacket suggests otherwise. Shoulder. Went through clean. He looks down at Castellanos, who lies motionless on the asphalt, his distinguished silver hair matted with blood. He's not. The finality of it hits her like a physical blow. Eduardo Castellanos, criminal, mastermind, untouchable shadow puppeteer, the man who orchestrated her attempted murder, is dead, killed by her son, killed protecting her. This is the cost of victory, she realizes. This is what justice looks like when it's stripped of courtrooms and constitutional protections and reduced to its most primal element, family defending family, love enforcing its own laws. She should feel horror, revulsion, the weight of her complicity in a man's death. Instead, she feels relief. The admission terrifies her more than Castellanos ever did. 40 years of serving the law, and in the end, she's grateful for its violation. 40 years of believing in due process, and when her son's life hung in the balance, she wanted exactly this: swift, final, absolute resolution. We need to go, Diesel calls out, his voice cutting through her moral crisis. Police response time from here is 8 minutes. We've got maybe 5. Marcus nods, swaying slightly as the adrenaline begins to wear off and the pain sets in. Clean up the scene. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong. His wallet, the Mercedes, already on it, Phoenix reports, efficiently stripping Castellanos' body of valuables while another angel hotwires the luxury sedan. This is how it ends, Maggie thinks as Marcus helps her back into the truck with his good arm. Not with verdicts and sentencing hearings, but with blood on desert asphalt and the sound of motorcycles disappearing into the dawn. Not with justice as she's always understood it, but with a sacrifice that will haunt her for the rest of her life. The sacrifice isn't Castellanos' death. It's the piece of her soul she's given up to accept it. The truck's engine thrums beneath them as they drive away from what used to be Eduardo Castellanos, the morning sun casting long shadows across the desert highway. Maggie keeps glancing at Marcus's shoulder, watching crimson seep through the makeshift bandage Diesel had fashioned from his own shirt. Her son, is bleeding because he chose to protect her, and the weight of that reality settles over her like lead. Hospital? Marcus asks, though his voice suggests he already knows her answer. Not yet. The prosecutor in her kicks into overdrive, cataloging the evidence they're carrying. Gunpowder residue, blood spatter, the kind of forensic breadcrumbs that could unravel everything. We need to clean up first. Make sure our stories align. Marcus actually laughs, a sound edged with pain and dark humor. Listen to yourself. Margaret Chen, coaching witnesses on testimony coordination. Your old colleagues would have a field day. The observation stings because it's true. Somewhere between the gas station confrontation and Castellanos's body cooling on Scottsdale asphalt, she's crossed lines she spent 4 decades defending. She's become complicit in evidence tampering, accessory after the fact, conspiracy to obstruct justice, a laundry list of felonies that would have earned her contempt in any courtroom she ever presided over. My old colleagues, she says quietly, never had to choose between the law and their family. The words hang between them as Marcus navigates toward the Angels' compound, sirens already wailing in the distance behind them. Police response, fire department, coroner, the machinery of official investigation grinding into motion. She wonders what story the scene will tell. Robbery gone wrong, as Phoenix suggested. Gang violence? Or will some sharp detective piece together the connections between Eduardo's criminal empire and the federal prosecutor who spent years trying to bring him down? You regret it? Marcus's question cuts through her spiraling thoughts. What happened back there? Maggie considers the question with the same methodical care she once applied to jury instructions. Does she regret Eduardo Castellanos's death, the violence that ended it, the moral compromises that made it possible, or does she regret the person she's had to become to survive in a world where her own government couldn't protect her? I regret that it was necessary, she says finally. I regret that a man had to die. But do I regret that the threat to our family is over? She meets his eyes in the rearview mirror. No. And that terrifies me more than anything else that's happened. Marcus nods, understanding flickering across his features. Welcome to the gray areas, Mom. Population, everyone who's ever had to choose between what's right and what's necessary. Mom. The word hits her like a physical blow every time he uses it, 40 years of absence compressed into a single syllable. She's been Margaret, Maggie, Prosecutor Chen, Judge Chen, even Miss Chen to medical staff who can't quite hide their pity. But Mom, that's an identity she never thought she'd claim. They pull into the compound as the sun climbs higher, other motorcycles already parked in neat rows. The Angels are home, mission accomplished. But there's no celebration in their movements. They've done what needed doing, but they understand the weight of it. These men, who society dismisses as criminals, have a clearer grasp of moral complexity than half the judges she's known. Phoenix torched the Mercedes in a chop shop on the south side, Diesel reports as Marcus climbs stiffly from the truck. Castellanos's wallet and jewelry will turn up in a pawn shop by noon, sold by a junkie with priors who'll swear he found it all in a dumpster. Clean trail, no connection to us. Professional criminals covering their tracks with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine. Maggie should be appalled by the casual expertise, the way they manipulate evidence and construct false narratives. Instead, she's grudgingly impressed. These men understand consequences in ways most people never have to. Hospital now, she says, watching Marcus try to hide his wince as Diesel helps him out of his bloody jacket. We'll say you had a motorcycle accident, came off your bike on gravel. Road rash explains the abrasions. Impact explains the shoulder wound. And you? Marcus asks. I'm your worried mother, along for moral support. The role feels strange and natural simultaneously, like clothing that should fit but hasn't been worn in 40 years. No one questions a mother's presence in an emergency room. As they head for the hospital, Maggie catches her reflection in the truck's side mirror. The woman staring back looks familiar but transformed, still Margaret Chen, still recognizably herself but harder somehow, refined by violence into something she doesn't entirely recognize. Perhaps this is what justice actually looks like. Not blind and impartial, but fiercely protective of what matters most. Not perfect and pure, but willing to be stained by the blood necessary to protect the innocent. She touches Marcus's uninjured hand, holding tight to the family she chose over everything else she used to believe. The return. The emergency room at Phoenix General smells of antiseptic and desperation, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead like electronic insects. Maggie wheels herself through the automatic doors beside Marcus, who clutches his injured shoulder with practiced stoicism. To anyone watching, they're exactly what they appear to be, a worried mother accompanying her injured son, seeking help in the sterile sanctuary of modern medicine. "Motorcycle accident," Marcus tells the triage nurse, his voice steady despite the pain etched around his eyes. "Came off my bike on loose gravel about an hour ago." The nurse, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and efficient hands, takes down the information without skepticism. She's seen it all before. Weekend warriors who think they can handle machines they don't respect. Gravity's lessons written in road rash and broken bones. She doesn't question why it took an hour to seek treatment, or why his mother arrived in a pickup truck instead of an ambulance. "We'll get you right in, honey," she says, already reaching for a wheelchair. "These gravel accidents can be nasty. You're lucky you were wearing leather." As they wheel Marcus into examination room 3, Maggie marvels at how easily the lies flow, how seamlessly they blend into the expected narrative. She's spent 40 years in courtrooms parsing truth from deception, and here she is, constructing false realities with the casual expertise of a career criminal. The transformation should disturb her more than it does. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez is young, competent, and refreshingly direct. She examines Marcus's shoulder with gentle thoroughness, probing the wound with instruments that make him hiss through gritted teeth. "Clean through and through," she announces, stepping back to wash her hands. "Missed the major blood vessels and bone. You're incredibly lucky. Another inch to the left and we'd be looking at arterial damage." "Lucky," Marcus repeats, catching Maggie's eye with dark humor. "That's me." As the doctor cleans and stitches the wound, Maggie finds herself studying her son's profile. The strong jaw she remembers from his baby pictures, now weathered by wind and violence, the careful way he holds himself, even in pain, as if suffering is just another kind of weather to endure. When did he learn such resilience? During which foster homes, which juvenile facilities, which nights when he wondered why his mother had given him away? The guilt hits her like a physical blow, sudden and devastating. All those years she told herself she'd made the responsible choice, that an unwed law student couldn't provide what a child needed, that adoption would give him opportunities she couldn't offer. Now, watching him bear pain with the stoicism of someone who's learned not to expect comfort, she wonders what kind of opportunities she actually provided. What kind of life did her responsible choice create? "Mom?" Marcus's voice cuts through her spiraling thoughts. "You okay?" The doctor glances up from her sutures, noting the obvious concern between them. "First motorcycle accident is always hard on parents," she says kindly. "The good news is, this should heal clean. 2 weeks in a sling, no riding until I clear him, and he'll be good as new." "Thank you," Maggie manages, though her throat feels tight. "Thank you for taking such good care of him." Dr. Rodriguez smiles. "He's lucky to have family who cares this much. A lot of the bikers we see come in alone." Alone. The word echoes in Maggie's mind as they complete the paperwork, as Marcus awkwardly signs insurance forms with his left hand as they make their way back to the parking lot where Diesel waits with the truck. How many times has her son been alone? In emergency rooms, in courtrooms, in the moments when life demanded more than any person should have to bear by themselves? "Stop," Marcus says quietly, as Diesel helps him into the passenger seat. "I can see you thinking yourself in circles. Whatever you're torturing yourself over, stop." "I abandoned you," she says, the words raw and immediate. "For 40 years I told myself it was the right choice, but look at you. Look at what you became. The scars, the life you've had to live, the violence you've had to learn. That's my fault." Marcus turns to face her fully, his expression serious but not unkind. "You want to know what I became? I became someone who stands up for people who can't stand up for themselves. Someone who protects family, even when that family includes a stubborn federal prosecutor who thinks she can handle armed gangsters alone." He winces as the movement pulls at his stitches. "Yeah, the path was rougher than either of us would have chosen." But it led me back to you when you needed me most. Diesel starts the truck, giving them privacy in the rumble of the engine. Through the windshield, Maggie can see the city spreading out before them, Phoenix rising from the desert like a promise of civilization, of order, of the rule of law she's served her entire adult life. But she's no longer quite the same woman who believed those institutions could protect what mattered most. "Where do we go from here?" she asks. Marcus settles back against the seat, exhaustion finally showing in his features. "Home," he says simply. "We go home. The new beginning." 6 months later, Maggie wheels herself onto the back patio of the small ranch house in Scottsdale, morning coffee steaming in the desert air. The house isn't much, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen that's seen better decades, but it's theirs. More importantly, it's far enough from her old neighborhood to represent a clean break, close enough to the Angels compound that Marcus can be there in 10 minutes if needed. The transformation has been gradual, like watching a photograph develop in slow motion. The woman who once commanded federal courtrooms with the authority of unwavering principle has learned to navigate a world where moral certainty is a luxury she can no longer afford. She still believes in justice, but her definition has expanded to include the rough, immediate kind dispensed by men with scarred knuckles and fierce loyalty. Marcus emerges from the kitchen, his shoulder moving freely now, the sling a memory. He's traded his leather jacket for a simple black t-shirt, but the Angels patch remains visible through the thin fabric. A reminder that some allegiances transcend convenience. In his hands, he carries 2 plates of scrambled eggs and toast, breakfast becoming their daily ritual of ordinary intimacy. "Sleep okay?" he asks, settling into the chair across from her. It's the same question every morning, his way of checking whether the nightmares have visited again. For weeks after Castellanos, she'd wake screaming, trapped in dreams where Eduardo's dead eyes accused her of becoming everything she'd once prosecuted. "Better," she says, and means it. The dreams come less frequently now, replaced by something that might eventually resemble peace. The new medication helps. They eat in comfortable silence, watching the sun climb over the Superstition Mountains. From here, Phoenix looks almost mythical, glass and steel rising from ancient desert like a testament to humanity's refusal to accept natural limitations. She used to see the city as proof that civilization could impose order on chaos. Now she understands it differently. Civilization and chaos aren't opposites, but dance partners, each one leading when circumstances demand. The doorbell interrupts their quiet morning, and Maggie tenses automatically. 6 months haven't erased the instinctive fear that every unexpected visitor might bring fresh threats. But Marcus simply stands, checking the security monitor they installed after the 3rd week of phantom knocks and imagined shadows. "It's Jenny," he says, and Maggie feels her shoulders relax. Detective Jennifer Walsh had been the investigating officer assigned to Eduardo Castellanos' murder. Young, sharp-eyed, and blessed with the kind of intuitive intelligence that made careers in law enforcement, she'd arrived at their door 3 days after the shooting with questions that could have unraveled everything. Instead, over coffee and careful conversation, she'd revealed a perspective that surprised them both. Some cases, she'd said quietly, solved themselves in ways that served justice better than any courtroom verdict ever could. Eduardo Castellanos had been responsible for 17 unsolved murders, countless lives destroyed by drugs and violence, a cancer that the legal system had proven incapable of removing. Sometimes, she'd said, studying Maggie with clear, honest eyes, the bad guys save us the trouble. Now Jenny visits monthly, ostensibly to check on Maggie's recovery, but really to share updates from a law enforcement community that's moved on to other crises. The Castellanos case remains officially unsolved, filed alongside thousands of other Phoenix homicides that will never see trial. His criminal empire collapsed within weeks of his death, lieutenants either arrested or fled, territory absorbed by less ambitious but more sustainable operations. "Morning, you two," Jenny says, accepting Marcus's offer of coffee with the ease of family friendship. "Brought you something I thought you'd want to see." She hands Maggie a newspaper clipping, a small item from the Arizona Republic's Metro section. The headline reads, "Local Woman's Foundation funds new victim services program." The article describes Elena Vasquez, mother of 3, whose husband was killed in gang violence 2 years earlier. Instead of surrendering to grief, she'd started a foundation providing legal aid and counseling to families destroyed by crime. The organization had just received its largest donation ever, $200,000 from an anonymous benefactor. Maggie sets the clipping aside without comment, but her eyes meet Marcus's across the table. Eduardo Castellanos's liquidated assets had provided several such donations over the past months. Money laundered through shell corporations and cryptocurrency exchanges, then donated to organizations serving crime victims. It's not exactly restitution, but it's something. Blood money transformed into hope, stolen wealth converted to healing. Funny thing about anonymous donations, Jenny observes, stirring sugar into her coffee. They never leave fingerprints. The comment hangs in the air, acknowledgement and absolution wrapped in casual conversation. They all understand the mathematics of their arrangement, justice served outside official channels, consequences imposed by unofficial means. Healing funded by wealth that was never legitimate to begin with. As Jenny leaves, Maggie wheels herself back to the patio, where Marcus has returned to his breakfast. The morning is warming toward the brutal heat that will define the afternoon, but for now, the air carries possibility. "Any regrets?" he asks. The same question from that terrible morning 6 months ago, but gentler now, offered in the safety of routine, rather than the chaos of violence. Maggie considers the question with the thoroughness it deserves. She regrets the necessity that brought them to this point. She regrets the years of separation that can never be recovered. She regrets the violence that scarred them both and the moral compromises that saved them. But watching her son finish his eggs, his presence solid and permanent in the morning light, she finds something that might eventually become wisdom. Some transformations require destruction first. Some new beginnings demand the courage to abandon everything you thought you believed about yourself. "No," she says finally. "No regrets." Marcus reaches across the table to squeeze her hand, scarred fingers intertwining with age-spotted ones. 40 years of separation bridged by the simple physics of touch. They are not the family either of them would have chosen, forged as they were by violence and necessity rather than love and choice. But they are family nonetheless, bound by blood spilled and blood shared, by choices made and consequences accepted. In the distance, motorcycle engines rumble to life, the angels beginning another day of the rough justice they dispense on Phoenix's forgotten streets. The sound doesn't frighten her anymore. Instead, it reminds her that protection comes in many forms, that family extends beyond genetics, that sometimes the people society calls criminals are the only ones willing to defend what matters most. Maggie Chen, retired federal prosecutor, wheels her chair closer to her son and watches the sun rise on the life they've built from the wreckage of everything they used to be. It's not the life she planned, but it's the life they chose. Imperfect, complicated, and absolutely completely theirs.